كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه أما بعد. We are coming close to the end of this chapter, and Alhamdulillah, we've learned a lot of rulings pertaining to marriage. In the previous lesson, we covered some rulings pertaining to blemishes which one spouse finds in another spouse and is put off by those blemishes, and more put off by the fact that the other spouse has not informed them of this blemish. Um, we learned rulings relating to that, and then we moved on to, or we started on the discussion of one spouse accepting Islam. What happens to the a marriage, and the rulings pertaining to that. We'll be delving into more rulings relating to that as well, inshallah, in this lesson, where the first ruling relates to the husband of a Jewish or a Christian woman. If he accepts Islam, we'll learn that the marriage remains intact. We'll also learn that if one spouse goes to a Muslim country where there is the full Sharia and laws of Allah being implemented, and there is a Muslim judge, Muslim governance, etc., then in that case, the marriage will be broken. Similarly, if one of the spouses has been imprisoned as a prisoner of war, the same ruling will apply, we will learn, inshallah. And also, what happens if both spouses become imprisoned or both spouses goes to a Muslim country, then we learn that the marriage will remain intact. And we will also discuss rulings about apostasy, where if one of the spouses apostatizes from Islam, then we learn that the other will be given a chance to no then they'll be given a chance to re-accept Islam. But if they don't re-accept Islam, then the marriage will be broken. And we'll also learn that if both of the spouses happen to apostatize from Islam, the marriage will remain. If they re-accept Islam, then still the marriage will remain. We'll also learn about the fact that apostates cannot marry, and nobody can marry them as well. We'll also learn that certain conditions of marriage, if they are not fulfilled, then some of them conditions are tolerated. When they accept Islam, the marriage will remain, and other conditions cannot be tolerated, and so the marriage will become invalid as soon as they accept Islam. So these are some rulings we will learn, inshallah, in today's lesson. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the ability to comprehend all that we learn. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Moving on now. When the husband of a woman from the people of the book, a Jewish woman or a Christian woman, accepts Islam, they remain married. This is a concept we've learned earlier, that a Muslim man is married to a Jewish woman or a Christian woman. That marriage is completely valid. There is no problem with such a marriage. And so if the husband of such a woman, a Jewish woman and a Christian woman, if he accepts Islam, then this marriage still remains. Now moving on to the next one. When one of the spouses comes over to us, Muslims, remember Imam Quduri rahmatullahi alayh is talking from the perspective that he lived in a Muslim country where there is Muslim governance and there is a Muslim judge, etc. Now moving on to the next one. When one of the spouses comes over to us, Muslims, remember Imam Quduri rahmatullahi alayh is talking from the perspective that he lived in a Muslim country where there is Muslim governance and there is a Muslim judge, etc. So he says, when one of the spouses comes over to us from enemy territory as a Muslim, then separation by divorce occurs between the two. Let's take the example of Tom and Jenny. Tom and Jenny, who are non-Muslims, are married, living in a non-Muslim country. Now, although Imam Quduri again mentions enemy territory, Darul Harb, like the previous mas'ala, it is not restricted to such a territory. It could also be a territory, a land which is ruled by non-Muslims, but who are not at war with Muslims. So it can be a non-Muslim country at war, and it can be a non-Muslim country that's not at war with Muslims. So again, if Tom and Jenny are married and Jenny later on accepts Islam and moves to a Muslim country, immediately what will happen is there will be a separation between Tom and Jenny, which will be considered a divorce. So why does this separation occur? The basic concept to understand here is that the reason for this separation is due to, number one, difference of religion. So one is a Muslim and the other is a non-Muslim. And number two, due to the difference in territory. One lives in a Muslim territory, the other in a non-Muslim territory. So for this reason, a separation occurs immediately. We learned above that a woman accepts Islam in a non-Muslim country. She'll need to wait for her iddah period to come to a completion, to end before she moves on. We learned above regarding a non-Muslim woman who accepts Islam in a non-Muslim territory. Her separation will not take place until her iddah period comes to an end. Now, down there, that was because she hadn't traveled to a Muslim country. Here, she has traveled to a Muslim country, and that's why her separation, she will not need to wait for her iddah to be completed. Is there any iddah? Is there any waiting period for such a woman? That discussion will come later on, inshallah. And then he says, if either of the two is taken prisoner of war, then separation by divorce takes place between the two. But if both of them are taken prisoners of war together, then separation by divorce does not take place. This is another ruling with the same principle we mentioned before. We said that due to the difference in territory, there will be a separation between the husband and wife. Here as well is another case similar to this. Here what's happening is one of them is imprisoned and then taken to the Muslim country. There will be a separation by way of divorce. Let's take the example of Zayd and Layla. Zayd and Layla are married and living in non-Muslim country. Layla later is imprisoned. There happens to be, for example, there happens to be a war between a Muslim country and the non-Muslim country. Layla gets imprisoned and she is taken over to the Muslim country. So now what will happen is there will be a separation by divorce taking place. On the other hand, if they are both at the same time taken away as prisoners, so now they are taken from a non-Muslim country to a Muslim country, then what will happen is no separation will take place. Why? Because there is no difference in territory between the husband and wife. The next ruling is similar to the discussion above. He says, when a woman comes over to us, to a Muslim country, as an emigrant, it is permitted for her to marry immediately. And according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, there is no waiting period upon her. But if she is pregnant, then she is not to marry until she gives birth. So here's a woman who has accepted Islam and migrates to a Muslim country. Her husband is a non-Muslim living in a non-Muslim country. As soon as she migrates as a Muslim, the marriage with her husband will terminate, and Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah says that there will be no waiting period for her. As soon as she comes to the Muslim country, she can now marry. There is no waiting period for her. The only time there is a waiting period is if she is pregnant, and her waiting period for a pregnant woman, the waiting period is when she gives birth. As soon as she gives birth, after that she can marry. So this is something that's an exceptional circumstance. The default ruling for any woman who is separated from her husband, whether by divorce or otherwise, is that she will go through the waiting period before she marries again. But this woman is, as we said earlier, has an exceptional circumstance, that she's come from a non-Muslim country as a Muslim, and now she will not need to wait if she is not pregnant. And this is the view of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, The other Imams held that she will need to wait, but this is the preponderant view. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah's view is the preponderant view. The next rulings are relating to apostasy and marriage. When one of the spouses leaves Islam as an apostate, then separation takes place between the two, and the separation between them will be without divorce. Whether it's the husband or the wife who becomes an apostate, the separation will take place between the two. And this separation will not be considered a divorce. It's going to be a mere separation. If it was the husband who became apostate and he had consummated the marriage with her, then she is entitled to the full dowry. But if he had not consummated the marriage with her, then she is entitled to half the dowry. Let's take the examples of Ibrahim and Khadija. They are both married, they are Muslims, and Ibrahim and Khadija agreed to £5,000 as dowry. Later on, after a few years, they've consummated the marriage. Later on, Ibrahim decides to apostatize. He leaves his religion. He becomes a Christian or a Jew. May Allah protect us all from apostasy. So Ibrahim and Khadija have agreed to £5,000 as dowry, and Ibrahim is the one who apostatizes. He's consummated the marriage. What will be due on him as dowry? The entire dowry will be due. So £5,000 will be due to Khadija. Why? Because as we learned the principles previously, that when the dowry has been stipulated and the marriage has been consummated, the entire dowry is due. But let's say Ibrahim and Khadija got married, and before the marriage has been consummated, Ibrahim has apostatized. So they've stipulated £5,000, marriage has not been consummated, then half of the dowry would be due. And again, the principles we learned previously are in play here. If it is she who became apostate, and if the apostasy was before consummation of the marriage, then there is no dowry for her. But if the apostasy took place after consummation of the marriage, then she is entitled to the full dowry. So here is the case where, let's say Ibrahim and Khadija are married and £5,000 again is stipulated as the dowry. But this time Khadija is the one who left the religion. They haven't consummated the marriage. Just before consummating the marriage, she left the religion. There will be no dowry for her. Now, this goes against the previous principle that we learned earlier. And the reason for this is because the separation that will take place between the two will be due to a fault on her part, the fault being that she is the one who left Islam. So because she's left Islam, she will not receive any dowry. But let's say they were married for a few years, they've stipulated £5,000 as dowry, consummated the marriage, and later on, Khadija decides to leave Islam. In this case, she will receive the full dowry. The reason for this, again, the previous principles are at play here, that the dowry has been stipulated, marriage has been consummated, and so she will receive the entire stipulated dowry. So the question is, why won't we consider the fault on her part and reduce that dowry? The reason for this is because marriage consummation is such a thing which does not, as soon as the marriage has been consummated, the woman receives her due dowry. She has the right to the dowry that's been stipulated once the marriage has been consummated. In the next one, he discusses the case where they both apostatize together, or they both enter Islam together. So he says, if both of the spouses become apostates together, then later accepted Islam together, they remain married. Why is this? We learned above that if one of the spouses leaves Islam, then separation will take place immediately. But here, it's both of them leaving Islam and both of them entering Islam. So they were in the religion at the same time, and they left the religion at the same time. So the marriage will remain intact. There is no reason here to cause a separation between them. Why? Because, again, they were married and the religion that they turned to was happening at the same time, and they also turned back to Islam at the same time. And then he says, it is not allowed for an apostate man to marry a Muslim woman, an apostate woman, or a disbelieving woman. A man who has apostatized cannot get married. And likewise, for an apostate woman, neither is a Muslim man to marry her, nor a disbeliever, nor an apostate man. In brief, a person who is an apostate cannot get married. Not a Muslim woman, not a Muslim man can get married to this apostate, nor a disbelieving person. This apostate, who of course is living in a Muslim country, nobody can get married to this person. Now the question is, why can't an apostate get married? This question is closely related to the very controversial discussion about an apostate facing the death penalty. The question goes like this: why does Islam say that there is a death penalty to those who apostatize from Islam, while Islam itself says that there is no force in the deen? Nobody can be compelled to be a Muslim. So Islam says, La ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in deen, but at the same time issues a death penalty for anyone who apostatizes. So there is a contradiction here. And they say that this is such an abhorrent ruling, abhorrent law, that Islam says a person who leaves Islam should get the death penalty. So why is this the case? First thing to be understood here is that there is no contradiction between the two. Where Islam says there is no compulsion in religion, it is regarding a person who is a non-Muslim and who hasn't yet accepted Islam. Nobody can force that person to accept Islam. When it comes to the death penalty, this death penalty is relating to a person who has been a Muslim and later on decides to apostatize, decides to renounce Islam. For this person is the death penalty. The death penalty is not for a person who has never been a Muslim. So there is no contradiction here. The ruling of no compulsion in religion still remains, and the death penalty remains for the person who has apostatized. The second point to bear in mind is this ruling applies only in Muslim countries where there is Muslim governance, there is the entire Sharia is being implemented in such a country. So it is only applying in those countries, not a non-Muslim country. If a person decides to apostatize, leave Islam, become a Christian, become a Jew after leaving Islam in a non-Muslim country, no one will say anything. No one will say there is a death penalty on that person. This will only apply to an apostate who leaves Islam in a Muslim country. And now the best way to understand this is, let's say a person joins the army. They are made to sign the contract that they will not expose or release any documents to anyone which are meant to be kept confidential. This person, later on, they decide to release these documents, not to anyone, to the enemy. This would be such a devastating thing to do. Naturally, the army, the country, would issue a penalty on that person. You know, in many countries, even today, this being treason, such a person will be facing the death penalty or a death sentence or life imprisonment. Whatever the case is, nobody says that these penalties are abhorrent. They would understand, it is understandably correct that this person has committed such a devastating crime, and nobody says anything that this is something that is abhorrent. In the same way, this person, whilst living in a Muslim country, decides to apostatize. Naturally, what's happening is this person will be trying to give the wrong and distorted image of Islam to people. And so the ruling is that this person will be given a few days to contemplate over the situation, and they will have a chance to accept Islam again. If they accept Islam, there's no death penalty on that person. But if they don't accept Islam, after a few days, they will be receiving that death penalty. Why? Because just like treason is devastating, similarly, leaving Islam whilst living in a Muslim country and then publicizing this, because the only way this person will be facing the death penalty is because they've somehow publicized it. The public know about it. This information has reached the Muslim ruler or the judge, and so this person will face such a penalty. Now, one may object that, yes, it is outrageous and out of order for a person to leave the fold of Islam, but it does not mean that the Islamic law has to hand out such a severe punishment like the death penalty. It could have been a punishment of a lower degree. Why does it have to be so severe? So the response to this is that you haven't really understood how severe, renouncing Islam is. Let's explain this way. Imagine if there was no such severe punishment like the death penalty in a Muslim country where there is Muslim governance. So you'll have a bunch of people who, they they might not like a few teachings and rulings of Islam, so they feel like, I don't like these rulings. I like the way other people are living. So they decide to leave the fold of Islam. And you have other people following. You might find a person who, has had bad experience with maybe their parents not having given the real teachings of Islam. Maybe they've had negative experiences with the people around them. So they felt that, Islam isn't the right religion. You might even have, hypocrites, munafiqs, who only enter the fold of Islam to show that they're Muslims, but they want to, find out and distort the true teachings of Islam. So they leave Islam and tell people, you know what, I know about Islam. I was a Muslim once. And imagine if there was, in such a scenario, imagine there was no such penalties, no such severe punishment, then this would create a lot of confusion and cause a lot of objections to arise within the Muslim community, the Muslim country. And that would be out of order for a Muslim country not to think about the unity of their country and of their government. So this would obviously cause a lot of issues within the Muslim country. And that's why this is such a case that it's such a severe punishment. He says, when either of the spouses is a Muslim, then the child is on their religion. And likewise, if either of the two accepts Islam and has a minor child, their child becomes Muslim due to their conversion to Islam. So you have one of the parents is a Muslim and they have a child. That child will be Muslim due to the Muslim parent. Remember, this is a child, so the child is not morally responsible. And the reason for this ruling is that we will look at what is the best interests of that child. And what does this imply? This implies that this child will grow up as a Muslim and will be taught Islam and its various teachings and rulings. And when the child passes away, the rites and rituals of Muslims will be carried out on that child in terms of burial, in terms of inheritance, and various other rulings will be done according to the laws of Islam and not the other religion. Now, the next part, the second passage, is very similar to this. It's where one of the two parents becomes a Muslim and they already have a child. So that child, as soon as that parent becomes a Muslim, that child will also become a Muslim. The difference between this one and the first one is one of the two parents was a Muslim and they had a child. So we're saying down there that that child will also be a Muslim. And in the second case, it's the child becomes a Muslim due to the parent becoming a Muslim. So that's the difference between the two. Another reason the scholars mention for this being the case, that the child will always be on the religion of the Muslim parent, is that the concept of Islam being the dominant religion. So Islam will dominate other religions and it will not be dominated. So the child will never be a non-Muslim as long as the child is a minor. There will never be a non-Muslim if one of the parents is a Muslim. And the next passage is very similar to this. If one of the parents is from the people of the book, a Jewish or Christian, and the other is a Magian, so they are not Muslims, but they are not from the people of the book, the child is also from the people of the book. The reason for this is because Christianity is closer to the natural laws of Islam. Moving on to the next one. When a disbeliever marries without witnesses or during the waiting period of a disbeliever, and that is permitted in their religion, then later both of them convert to Islam, they remain married. So this is a case where they had done something and gotten married in such a way which would have become invalid if they had gotten married as Muslims. But because in their religion it was okay to get married in such a way, their husband and wife, when they become Muslims together, their marriage will remain intact. To explain this, let's take the examples of Ben and Sarah. Ben and Sarah are both married and they are Jews. And let's say in Judaism, it is okay to get married without witnesses. So Ben and Sarah had gotten married without witnesses, and later they both accept Islam together. Will their marriage remain intact after they become Muslims? Yes, it will. Why? Because they had done something invalid, meaning they had gotten married as witnesses, without witnesses, but this took place before they accepted Islam. Had they done this after they became Muslims, this would not have been valid. But this is okay because it's perfectly fine in their religion. Let's take another example. You have Harry and Amanda. They are both Christians. And let's say in Christianity, it is perfectly fine for a woman to get married while she is in her iddah, her waiting period. So Harry and Amanda had both gotten married as Christians, and Amanda was in her waiting period. And later on, both Harry and Amanda become Muslims. Will their marriage remain intact? Yes, it will remain intact. Why? Because this factor which would have otherwise been invalid, which would have otherwise made their marriage become invalid if they had gotten married in this way as Muslims, this is not found. Why? Because that was happening during the time when they were Christians. And we said in Christianity, that's perfectly fine to get married in such a way. So because that's okay in their religion, when they become Muslims, we are not going to say that their marriage has now become invalidated. No, their marriage will remain intact because they did not do something invalid as Muslims. They had gotten married in an invalid way, but an invalid way according to their religion. The next one is talking about something very similar to this, but there is a contrast here. He says, if a Magian marries his mother or his daughter, then later both of them become Muslims, they are separated. So this is a case of a Magian marrying his mother or his daughter. And despite the fact that it may be perfectly fine for a Magian to get married to his mother or to get married to his daughter, when they both become Muslims, the husband and his mother who he has married or his daughter who he has married, when they both become Muslims, there will be a separation between the two. Now, the reason for this is that the Magian who gets married to his mother or daughter, it might be perfectly fine. But in Islam, that is not fine at all. Even after one gets married, that person, this prohibition of not being allowed to be married to a person's mother or a daughter is something that is always going to be there. So once a person comes to Islam, there is no concept of a person marrying their mother or a person marrying their daughter. It's not just a condition to conduct the marriage. It's not just a condition that must be met when the marriage contract is taking place. Rather, even after the marriage contract has taken place, they cannot be married in such a